Have you ever imagined what it would be like to live forever with the appearance of a young man, yet carrying centuries of regrets, difficult choices, and a constant struggle for purpose? This is the story of Armand, the eternally young vampire from the Vampire Chronicles. Far beyond the myth of the perfect immortal, Armand is a reflection of our own human dilemmas. The search for acceptance, the weight of decisions, and the eternal question, what truly gives meaning to life? In this video, you will uncover the secrets behind his journey, from his origins as Andrei in Kiev to his transformation at the hands of Marius, through betrayals, loves, and his inner struggle between light and darkness. If you are a fan of complex characters and stories that blend fantasy and emotional depth, stay until the end. I promise that Armand's journey will change the way you see not just vampires, but also yourself. Before he became known as Armand the angelic vampire, he was Andrei, a boy born in Kiev in the year 1480. His childhood, though brief, was marked by an almost sacred innocence. The son of a devout family, Andrei possessed an extraordinary talent. He created religious icons with such perfection that it was said his works were not made by human hands. To Andrei, these gifts were a manifestation of divine grace, something he never attributed to himself. His father, proud, saw in this talent a direct connection to God, but the serenity of this life was brutally interrupted. During a journey to deliver one of his iconic religious works, Andrei and his father were attacked by Tatars. The attack was swift and merciless, leaving his family destroyed and the boy at the mercy of the invaders' cruelty. Kidnapped and torn from everything he knew, Andrei was taken as a slave, beginning a journey marked by pain and humiliation. After days traveling on a ship, he arrived in Italy, a world completely different from the one in which he had grown up. In Venice, Andrei was sold to a brothel, where he refused to submit to the demands of his captors. His resistance, however, came at a high price. Beaten and left to die in the basement, he even lost the memory of who he was. There, in the midst of despair and darkness, it seemed that Andrei's fate was sealed. And it was at this moment of extreme vulnerability that the figure of Marius de Romanus entered his life, changing everything forever. The man who would rescue him and rename him as Amadeo saw something special in that young man destroyed by the world. Thus, Andrei's cycle of rebirth and transformation began. When Marius de Romanus found Andrei in the brothel, he saw something beyond the battered and memoryless boy. He saw a broken soul that still carried a spark of purity and potential. Determined to save the young man, Marius rescued him from that place of misery and took him to his magnificent residence in Venice. There, he gave him a new name, Amadeo, which means beloved of God. It was the beginning of a new life, but also the prelude to an existence filled with paradoxes. In his home, Marius provided Amadeo with an environment of learning and beauty. Surrounded by other rescued boys, Amadeo was educated in the arts, philosophy, and history. His talent for painting soon resurfaced, though he hesitated to create, as if something within him was still trapped in the shadows of his past. Despite this, he demonstrated a singular brilliance, absorbing knowledge with remarkable speed and developing a profound admiration for his savior. The relationship between Marius and Amadeo, however, went beyond the conventional. There was a mixture of love, devotion, and mystery, especially as Amadeo began to notice that Marius was no ordinary man. Yet the young man was so enchanted with his new life that he chose to ignore the peculiarities, such as Marius's nocturnal reclusiveness and reserved behavior. For Amadeo, nothing mattered more than the safety and happiness he had found. This happiness, however, was devastatingly shaken. At the age of 17, Amadeo attracted the attention of an Englishman named Lord Harlech, who became obsessed with him. In a fit of jealousy and madness, Harlech wounded Amadeo with a poisoned blade, leaving him on the brink of death. Desperate to save his protege, Marius made a decision that would change the fate of them both forever. He granted Amadeo the Dark Gift, transforming him into a vampire. The transformation was not only physical, but also emotional. Amadeo awoke to a new existence with heightened senses and a power he could barely comprehend. Under Marius's guidance, he learned to hunt, but only those deemed evildoers. However, this new power came at a cost. Amadeo began to question the meaning of his immortality and the morality of his actions, planting the seeds of the dilemmas that would accompany him for centuries. What seemed to be the beginning of a harmonious eternity alongside Marius was abruptly interrupted when his master's residence was attacked by Santino and his coven of fanatical vampires. Amadeo was torn from his mentor and everything he knew, taken to a new, dark, and oppressive reality. Under Santino's dominance, he was forced to embrace a rigid and dark dogma, portraying vampires as cursed creatures entirely separate from humanity. Now known as Armand, he assumed a new identity under the control of the Parisian coven. Over time, he became the leader of this group, living in the depths of a cemetery. He enforced the group's beliefs with zeal, even as doubts began to arise within him. The physical and emotional isolation was almost unbearable, but Armand believed he was fulfilling his destiny. The idea of being a guardian of vampire laws filled a void, even if only temporarily. This dogmatic structure was shaken when Lestat the Lion Court and Gabriel appeared. Lestat, with his rebellious spirit, questioned the validity of the rules the coven followed, directly challenging Armand's authority. His vision that vampires could coexist with humans and live beyond the shadows was a stark contrast to what Armand had been taught. The encounter was a turning point, and for the first time in centuries, Armand began to question the rigidity of his own existence. Unable to contain Lestat's influence, the coven began to crumble. Armand, realizing that the old order was no longer sustainable, made an extreme decision. He exterminated most of his group's members, ending the legacy of the coven. Despite his radical act, he found himself lost, directionless, and profoundly lonely. With the collapse of the coven, Armand was on the verge of a new beginning, but unsure of which path to take. After the collapse of the Parisian coven, Armand found a new purpose by taking command of the Theatre de Vampires, a group of vampires hiding in plain sight, using the theater as a cover. Located in Paris, the theater staged macabre plays exploring themes of death and immortality, often with the vampires themselves as actors. To the human audience, it was nothing more than a performance, but for Armand, it was a new way of existing, balancing between the mortal and immortal worlds. However, the Theatre de Vampires was also a place of manipulation and power. It was there that Armand met Louis and Claudia, two vampires deeply connected, but equally marked by internal conflicts. Fascinated by Louis, Armand began to manipulate him, planting doubts in his mind about his relationship with Claudia. He saw in Louis a reflection of himself, someone struggling to understand the meaning of his existence. Claudia, on the other hand, saw Armand as a threat. She recognized his influence over Louis and the risk it posed to her own survival. The tension between them culminated in tragedy when Armand, using vampire laws to his advantage, orchestrated Claudia's trial for her attempt to kill Lestat. Claudia was condemned to death, an event that sealed the fate of her relationship with Louis. After Claudia's execution, Armand got what he wanted. Louis was free to follow him. They traveled together for a time, but the pain of losing Claudia and the guilt consumed Louis to the point where he could never recover. Over time, Armand realized that Louis could not provide the companionship he so desperately sought. Once again, Armand found himself alone, surrounded by the darkness of his own actions and choices. The following centuries were marked by profound introspection for Armand, as he tried to understand his place in a world that was changing ever more rapidly. Even with his immortality, he could not escape his doubts and regrets. His internal struggle between faith and skepticism reached its peak after hearing Lestat's story about Memnoch the Devil. Convinced that Lestat had truly seen heaven and hell, Armand attempted to take his own life by exposing himself to sunlight, seeking either redemption or divine punishment. But the attempt was a failure, leaving him gravely wounded and more lost than ever. During this period of weakness, Armand found a new thread of connection to the world through Daniel Malloy, the journalist who had recorded Lewis's story in Interview with the Vampire. Fascinated by Daniel, Armand began to follow him and question him, trying to understand men in the century in which they lived. His curiosity led to an obsession with modern technology, something that symbolized both progress and alienation. The relationship with Daniel, however, was complex and full of contradictions. Armand loved Daniel in a way he himself did not fully understand. He wanted to keep Daniel by his side, but refused to turn him into a vampire, fearing to repeat the mistakes of his past. Daniel, in turn, became increasingly frustrated with the situation, often escaping only to be brought back by Armand. Eventually, unable to bear the thought of losing Daniel, Armand relented and turned him into a vampire. Together, they attended Lestat's concert and witnessed catastrophic events that shook the vampire world. Despite this, their relationship began to crumble, and Armand once again found himself alone, with his internal conflicts as present as ever. After centuries of solitude and introspection, Armand found a new purpose when he crossed paths with Sybelle, a talented young pianist, and Benji, a boy with a vibrant and inquisitive spirit. Both were trapped in vulnerable situations, and Armand intervened to save them, protecting them as he had never done before. Sybelle and Benji brought into his life an unexpected connection, something akin to a family, a concept Armand had thought unattainable for a vampire. Sybelle, with her ethereal music, and Benji, with his curiosity about the world, became emotional anchors for Armand, offering a new perspective on existence. He found in both a sense of responsibility and affection that he had not experienced in a long time. Despite this, the joy of having them by his side was constantly overshadowed by the fear of losing them to mortality. This fear reached its peak when, without Armand's consent, Marius transformed Sybelle and Benji into vampires. For Armand, this was a devastating blow. He had wanted them to live their mortal lives to the fullest, free from the burden of immortality. The transformation seemed to him a theft of what he considered most precious, the humanity of his protégés. Despite his initial pain, Armand eventually accepted what had happened. He chose to see the transformation as a new opportunity to protect them and to create something close to a home. Sybelle and Benji became an extension of his own existence, offering him a new way to confront the void in eternity. For the first time in centuries, Armand found emotional stability, albeit fragile, by taking on the role of guardian to those he loved. With Sybelle and Benji by his side, Armand began to confront the dilemmas that had haunted him for centuries. What is the true meaning of immortality? Is it possible to find purpose in an infinite existence? Or does eternity merely amplify the regrets and losses accumulated over time? Despite his angelic appearance and power, Armand was never able to escape the deeply human nature of his internal conflicts. He began to reflect on the impact of the choices he had made, from the times he sought power at the expense of others to the moments when he desperately tried to connect with those he loved. These meditations led him to a deeper understanding of himself and the world around him. Immortality, Armand concluded, was not an absolute gift, but a constant opportunity for renewal, even if painful. Sybelle, with her music that seemed to touch his soul, and Benji, with his restless youthfulness, helped Armand find a sense of balance. He began to accept that his existence did not need to be defined solely by past mistakes or the tragedies he had suffered. Instead, he could create meaning from the connections he nurtured, even if they were imperfect or fleeting. Through this journey, Armand revealed something universal. Everyone, whether mortal or immortal, is searching for a purpose, a reason to continue. And often, that reason can be found in the people we choose to care for and protect, and in the courage to move forward despite the weight of the past. And so, Armand remains a living paradox, eternally young and burdened by the weight of centuries. He walks through this world with the beauty of an angel and the soul of a wounded poet, searching for meaning where immortality has only brought shadows. His story is not one of pure darkness or light, but of a fragile balance between the two, like a delicate ballet on the edge of eternity. He shows us that immortality does not erase pain, but it also does not extinguish hope. There is a melancholic charm in his struggle, a silent lesson in his persistence. For even as he carries the regrets of 100 lives and the cries of those left behind, he continues, still capable of love, still willing to protect. At his core, Armand teaches us that even in the vastness of time, it is connections, fleeting or eternal, that give us a glimpse of something greater. And then, the night envelopes him once more, as it always has and always will. But with every step he takes, in the darkness he inhabits, echoes a question he will never stop asking. If not love, then what is left to us? If this journey has touched something within you, remember that stories are portals to understanding not only the world around us, but also the depths of ourselves. Subscribe, share your perspective, and continue with me as we uncover the mysteries and dilemmas of souls as eternal as they are tragic. After all, in eternity, we are all learners.